They adopted the girl, thinking they were saving an orphan. But one day she whispered her mother's name, and the truth changed everything. Write in the comments from where you watch this video. Subscribe to the channel. Emily Harris sat by the kitchen window, staring at the backyard where her children, Ben and Lily, played under the late afternoon sun. Their laughter floated through the air, carefree and unburdened. She'd always loved watching them, feeling grateful for the life she and Daniel had built. Their home, a modest yet comfortable house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, was filled with warmth, laughter, and love. But lately, an unshakable feeling had taken root inside her, an aching sense that there was more she could do, more love she could give. The idea had started as a whisper in the back of her mind, a fleeting thought sparked by a documentary she had watched late one night while Daniel was asleep beside her. It had been about children orphaned by war, famine, and poverty in developing countries, children left to fend for themselves in overcrowded orphanages with little hope of a better future. The images had stayed with her long after the screen went dark. Small faces pressed against rusted metal bars, tiny hands reaching for someone, anyone, who might offer them kindness. At first, she hadn't said anything. The thought had seemed too vast, too life-altering to voice aloud. But over the following weeks, she found herself drawn to articles and stories about international adoption, reading late into the night while Daniel slept beside her. She scrolled through pages of statistics, learned about the bureaucratic hurdles, and watched countless interviews with families who had opened their homes to children from across the world. It wasn't until one evening at dinner that she finally brought it up. "I've been thinking," she said, pushing her fork through her salad, not meeting Daniel's gaze right away. "What if we adopted a child?" Daniel, who had been slicing his steak, paused mid-cut. Across the table, Ben and Lily, absorbed in their own conversation about a school project, didn't seem to hear. "Adopt?" Daniel repeated, setting his knife down. Emily nodded, finally looking up at him. "There are so many children out there who don't have families. I read about this agency that helps connect adoptive parents with children in need." "Emily," Daniel sighed, leaning back in his chair. "That's a huge decision." "I know," she said quickly. "I'm not saying we should rush into anything, but think about it. We have the resources, we have the space, and we have love to give." Daniel rubbed his chin, considering. "It's not just about love, though. Adoption is complicated, and international adoption even more so. What about the emotional impact? The cultural differences? What if—" "I've read about all of that," Emily interrupted, her voice firmer now. "I know it won't be easy, but Daniel, I keep thinking about this. Every night, I wonder if there's a child out there who needs us as much as we need them." A silence stretched between them. From across the table, Ben finally looked up. "Wait, are we getting a new brother or sister?" Lily's eyes widened. "Like, for real?" Daniel exhaled, shaking his head with a small chuckle. "Your mom has an idea," he said. "We're just talking right now." "But we'd have to decide as a family," Emily added, looking at both children. "If we did this, it would mean a big change for all of us. A new sibling, a new culture, maybe even a different language." Ben looked at Lily, then back at his parents. "I think it would be kind of cool." Lily grinned. "Me too." Emily's heart lifted. She looked back at Daniel, who sighed again, but gave her a small, reluctant smile. "Let's do some more research," he said finally. "If we're going to do this, we have to do it right." Over the next few weeks, Emily and Daniel immersed themselves in the process. They contacted agencies, attended informational sessions, and spoke with other adoptive parents. The stories they heard ranged from beautiful to heartbreaking, full of both joy and struggle. They learned about the bureaucratic red tape, the costs, the potential psychological effects on the child, and the ethical concerns surrounding international adoption. Emily was determined to ensure they were adopting responsibly, that they wouldn't be taking a child away from a family that could care for them if given the right support. After careful consideration, they decided on an agency called Global Kids, which had a long history of placing children from African countries with adoptive families in the United States. They filled out forms, submitted background checks, and went through home studies. Each step brought them closer to the reality of expanding their family. Then, one day, they received a file from the agency. The email contained a single photograph of a little girl. She looked about 5 or 6 years old, with deep brown eyes and tightly coiled black hair. She wore a simple dress and held a small, well-worn cloth doll in her hands. Her expression was solemn, her lips slightly parted as if she had been caught mid-thought. Her name was Naomi. The file explained that she was from a small rural village in an East African country, that her father had died, and her mother had abandoned her, unable to care for her. She had been placed in an orphanage when she was 4. Emily felt something shift inside her as she stared at the photo. She didn't believe in fate, but in that moment, she felt an unshakable certainty. This little girl belonged with them. When Daniel came home that evening, Emily showed him the file. He read through it carefully, glancing at her every so often. Finally, he exhaled and nodded. "Let's do it," he said. The children were ecstatic when they found out. They asked dozens of questions about Naomi, about where she lived, about what she would be like. Emily answered what she could, but there was still so much they didn't know. The next few months were a whirlwind of paperwork, legal processes, and preparation. They converted the guest room into a bedroom for Naomi, carefully choosing furniture, bedding, and toys. Emily spent hours reading about her birth country, trying to learn as much as she could about its culture, traditions, and language. She wanted to be prepared, to make Naomi's transition as smooth as possible. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they received the call. "Your adoption has been approved," Sarah from Global Kids told them. "You can travel to bring Naomi home." Emily felt her breath catch. This was it. She looked at Daniel, who had been listening on speakerphone beside her. His eyes met hers, and in that moment, they both knew. Their lives were about to change forever. Their bags were packed within days. Flights were booked, arrangements made. Soon they would be in Africa, meeting their daughter for the first time. Emily lay awake the night before their departure, staring at the ceiling. There was excitement, yes, but also a creeping sense of anxiety. She told herself it was normal, that it was just the weight of such a big change pressing on her. She didn't yet know that her unease was more than nerves, that something wasn't right, that the story they had been told about Naomi was not the whole truth. The plane shuddered slightly as it descended through a layer of thick clouds, the sky beyond the window a vast expanse of golden light melting into dusk. Emily pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching as the landscape below sharpened into view, rolling fields, clusters of tiny houses with corrugated metal roofs, winding dirt roads stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The land looked different from anything she had ever seen, vast and untamed, yet strangely beautiful. Beside her, Daniel was flipping through their paperwork one last time, double-checking the documents they would need upon arrival. He had barely spoken since they left the airport back home. his usual calm exterior strained with unspoken tension. Across the aisle, Ben and Lily were dozing, their heads tilted toward each other, lulled by the rhythmic hum of the aircraft. Emily's heart pounded. They were only minutes away from stepping into a new reality, one they had spent months preparing for but still felt unprepared to face. Naomi was waiting for them here, a little girl they had never met, whose life they were about to change forever. The airport was small, the air heavy with humidity and the scent of earth. The moment they stepped outside, the warmth wrapped around them like a thick blanket, the distant hum of voices and honking cars a chaotic contrast to the sterile silence of the plane. A group of men stood near the exit, waving signs with handwritten names. It took only a moment for Emily to spot their driver, a tall man in a crisp white shirt holding a sign that read, "Harris Family." "Welcome to Uganda." He greeted them with a broad smile. "I am Samuel. I'll be taking you to your hotel." His voice was warm and reassuring, but Emily couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of unfamiliarity. Everything around them felt different. The air, the sky, the very energy of the place. As Samuel led them to the waiting car, she reached for Daniel's hand, gripping it tightly. The drive through the city was a blur of movement and noise. Streets bustled with life, women carrying baskets on their heads, children playing barefoot on the roadside, men pushing carts piled high with fruit. The markets overflowed with color and sound, vendors calling out their prices, the rich aroma of spices filling the air. It was both exhilarating and overwhelming, a sensory overload that made Emily feel like a stranger in a world she barely understood. Their hotel was a modest but comfortable building with a gated entrance and a small courtyard filled with flowering trees. Inside, the air conditioning hummed softly, providing a welcome relief from the heat. After checking in, Samuel informed them that they would be visiting the orphanage the following morning. That night, Emily barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined Naomi. Would she be scared? Would she cry when she saw them? Or worse, would she refuse to come with them? The thought gnawed at her, filling her with doubts she had tried so hard to suppress. The morning came too quickly. Dressed in light clothing to combat the heat, they climbed back into Samuel's car for the long drive to the orphanage. The city soon gave way to open countryside, the roads becoming rougher, the houses more spaced apart. The orphanage was a low, concrete building surrounded by a chain-link fence. The moment they arrived, a group of children came running to the gate, their faces lighting up with excitement. A woman in a faded blue dress stepped forward, smiling warmly. "You must be the Harris family," she said, extending a hand. "I am Margaret, the orphanage director. Welcome." Emily shook her hand, her palms damp with nervousness. "Thank you. We're so grateful to be here." Margaret led them inside. The interior was sparse but clean, with simple wooden furniture and faded posters on the walls. Children sat on woven mats, playing quietly or watching curiously as the visitors passed. Emily's pulse quickened as Margaret turned to a small doorway. "Naomi is waiting for you," she said gently. And then there she was. She was smaller than Emily had expected, her delicate frame wrapped in a simple pink dress. Her large brown eyes flicked between the strangers standing before her, her tiny hands clutching a worn cloth doll. She did not run toward them. She did not smile. She only stood there, silent, unmoving. Emily knelt down slowly, her voice soft. "Hi, Naomi." The girl blinked, gripping her doll tighter. A lump formed in Emily's throat. She had imagined this moment so many times. Naomi rushing into her arms, smiling, laughing. But reality was different. Reality was a child who didn't know her, didn't understand what was happening, didn't yet trust the people who had come to take her away. Margaret spoke to Naomi in her native language, her tone soothing. Slowly, hesitantly, Naomi took a tiny step forward. Emily reached into her bag and pulled out a small stuffed bunny, holding it out. "This is for you." Naomi hesitated, then took the toy, running her fingers over its soft ears. It was a small victory. The paperwork took hours. They signed document after document, their signatures sealing a decision that had already been made months ago. The orphanage staff handed over a small bag with Naomi's few belongings, a change of clothes, a pair of sandals, and the cloth doll she refused to let go of. And then, just like that, it was time to leave. Naomi did not cry as they walked to the car. She did not protest as Margaret knelt and hugged her goodbye, whispering words only she could understand. But Emily saw the way her fingers dug into the fabric of her dress, the tension in her tiny shoulders. As they drove away, Emily glanced back. The orphanage faded into the distance, disappearing behind a cloud of dust. Naomi sat beside her, silent, her eyes locked on the road ahead. Emily reached for her hand, but Naomi pulled away. Her heart ached, but she understood. This was not the beginning Naomi had wished for. It was the ending of everything she had ever known. The journey back to the hotel was quiet. Ben and Lily whispered to each other, unsure of how to interact with their new sister. Daniel kept his eyes on the road. That night, Naomi refused to sleep in the bed they had set up for her. Instead, she curled up on the floor, clutching her doll tightly to her chest. Emily sat beside her, stroking her back gently, whispering reassurances that Naomi could not yet understand. She told herself that things would get better, that Naomi just needed time. But deep down, beneath the exhaustion and hope, a tiny voice whispered something else. Something was wrong. And Emily didn't know it yet, but the story they had been told about Naomi, about her past, her family, was far from the truth. The plane ride back to the United States was long, but it felt even longer with the weight of uncertainty sitting between them. Naomi remained quiet, her small body stiff in the airplane seat. She refused to let go of the cloth doll she had brought from the orphanage, clutching it to her chest as if it were the only thing anchoring her to familiarity. Emily watched her carefully, resisting the urge to reach out and comfort her. Every time she tried to touch Naomi's hand or stroke her back, the child flinched or pulled away, retreating into herself. Ben and Lily, who had been eager to meet their new sister, tried to engage her. Ben offered her a small pack of crackers, but Naomi simply stared at them unmoving. Lily showed her a drawing she had made during the flight, but Naomi didn't respond. After a while, the children grew quiet, confused by the lack of reaction. Emily had read about the difficulties of adoption, about the trauma children experienced when being removed from their homes, but experiencing it firsthand was different. There was a palpable distance between them, an invisible barrier that no one knew how to cross. Daniel spent most of the flight watching, his concern evident in the way his brow furrowed each time he glanced at Naomi. He was not a man who voiced his worries easily, but Emily could sense them. She felt them, too. The initial excitement had faded, replaced by the stark reality of what they had done. They had taken a child from everything she had ever known and placed her in an entirely foreign world. They had done it with the best of intentions, but was that enough? When they finally landed and went through customs, Naomi stayed close to Emily, though she never reached for her hand. The moment they stepped out of the airport, she flinched at the sudden blast of cold air. It was early spring, and the crisp American breeze was a stark contrast to the humid warmth of her homeland. The car ride home was quiet. Naomi sat in the back seat, her eyes darting between the unfamiliar buildings and roads. When they finally pulled into their driveway, Ben and Lily eagerly jumped out, stretching their legs and running up the front steps. Emily and Daniel led Naomi more slowly, giving her time to process. Inside, the house was warm, inviting. The scent of lavender from a diffuser filled the air. Emily had spent days preparing Naomi's room, carefully choosing soft blankets and stuffed animals, hoping to create a space that would make her feel safe. But when Naomi stepped inside, she simply stood there, unmoving. "This is your room, sweetheart," Emily said gently. "It's all for you." Naomi didn't react. She turned her gaze to the bed, the neatly arranged toys, the books lined up on the shelf. Then, without a word, she walked past them and curled up on the floor in the corner of the room, pressing her doll tightly against her chest. Emily's heart clenched. She crouched beside her, but Naomi had already squeezed her eyes shut, as if willing herself to disappear. That night, they left the door to Naomi's room open, checking on her every hour. She didn't move from her spot. She didn't make a sound. When Emily woke up at dawn and peeked inside again, she found Naomi exactly as she had left her, curled up on the floor, her breathing steady, her doll still clutched in her arms. Over the next few days, the household settled into an uneasy rhythm. Naomi remained withdrawn, watching everyone with wary eyes. She ate in silence, barely touching the food Emily prepared for her. She refused to sit at the dining table, preferring instead to crouch on the floor in the corner of the room. Emily tried everything. She made Naomi's favorite foods, or at least what she thought might be her favorite, based on what little information they had received. She read her bedtime stories, even though Naomi didn't understand English yet. She gave her space when she needed it, but she also tried to engage her in small ways. Nothing worked. The language barrier was an issue, but it was more than that. Naomi did not just struggle to communicate, she resisted it. She avoided eye contact. She recoiled from touch. It was as if she had built walls around herself so thick that no one could break through. Ben and Lily did their best to welcome her. Lily brought her dolls, lining them up on the floor, hoping Naomi would play. Ben offered to show her his collection of toy cars, but Naomi only stared at them, her expression unreadable. One evening, as Emily was tidying up the living room, she noticed Naomi sitting by the window, staring outside. The sky was darkening, the streetlights flickering on. She was whispering something under her breath, so softly that Emily almost didn't hear it. She stepped closer. Naomi's voice was barely above a breath. It was a single word, repeated over and over. Emily frowned, straining to make it out. Then, suddenly, she understood. "Mama." Emily felt her heart twist. She had known, of course, that Naomi had lost her parents, but hearing her whisper for her mother in the dark, alone, was something else entirely. She wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but something told her to wait. Naomi wasn't ready. Not yet. The weeks passed, and slowly, things began to change. Naomi no longer hid in the corner of her room. She began to sit on the couch, though she still kept a noticeable distance from everyone else. She started eating more, accepting the meals Emily prepared, though she never asked for anything. She listened when Emily spoke, and, once or twice, she even mimicked words in English. But there were other moments, unsettling ones. Naomi had a habit of waking up in the middle of the night, sitting silently in bed, staring at the door. When Emily asked her if she needed anything, she never responded. Then there were the dreams. Sometimes Naomi would cry out in her sleep, her voice trembling with fear. When Emily rushed to her side, she found her covered in sweat, her small hands clutching at the sheets. But when she tried to wake her, Naomi only turned away, curling into herself. One evening, after Naomi had finally fallen asleep, Emily sat beside Daniel in the living room. "I'm worried about her," she admitted. Daniel sighed, rubbing his face. "I know, I am too, but this is normal, isn't it? She's been through so much." Emily hesitated. "It's not just that. It's the way she avoids talking about her past, the way she flinches when I mention her parents. I feel like there's something she's not telling us." Daniel frowned. "Emily, she's a child who's been through unimaginable trauma. Maybe she just doesn't want to remember." But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than that. There was something they weren't being told. That night, after Daniel had gone to bed, Emily sat in the dim light of the kitchen, staring at the adoption papers. She reread every line, searching for something, anything she might have missed. Then, almost absently, she picked up her phone and typed the name of the adoption agency into the search bar. Her breath caught as she scrolled through the results. She had expected to find stories like theirs, families who had adopted through the agency, stories of happy endings. Instead, she found something else: reports of unethical practices, investigations into falsified documents, claims that some children placed for adoption had not actually been orphans. Emily's hands trembled as she clicked on one of the articles. She read the words, her heart pounding. And suddenly, the walls of their home, the warmth of their family, the very foundation of everything they had believed, it all began to crack. Emily couldn't sleep. The glow of her phone screen illuminated the dark room as she read through the article for the third time, her heart pounding harder with each word. The words on the page blurred together: fraudulent adoptions, forged documents, children taken under false pretenses. She tried to convince herself that it was a mistake, that it had nothing to do with Naomi, but the doubt had already taken root. The adoption agency they had trusted, Global Kids, had been implicated in past scandals. There were stories of biological parents being misled, told their children were only being taken for education abroad, only to later find out that they had been permanently adopted without their consent. Emily's hands trembled as she set her phone down on the nightstand. She glanced at Daniel, who was fast asleep beside her, his breathing slow and steady. She wanted to wake him, to tell him everything she had just read. But what would she even say? That she suddenly wasn't sure if Naomi was truly an orphan? That the life they had given her, one they had believed was an act of kindness, might have been built on a lie? She lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. When the first light of dawn crept through the window, she finally got out of bed. The house was silent. As she walked down the hallway, she paused outside Naomi's room. The door was slightly ajar. Peering inside, she saw the small figure curled on the floor, just as she had been the first night they brought her home. Something about the sight made Emily's chest tighten. Slowly, she stepped inside. Naomi was asleep, her arms wrapped around the cloth doll she refused to part with. But even in sleep, her body was tense, as if bracing for something unseen. Emily knelt down beside her and gently brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. Naomi stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, dark and alert. Emily smiled softly. "Good morning, sweetheart." Naomi didn't answer. She blinked up at Emily, then sat up slowly, clutching the doll tighter. Emily hesitated, then tried again. "Did you sleep okay?" No response. She had grown used to Naomi's silence, but today it unsettled her more than usual. The words from the article lingered in her mind. What if she's scared? What if she knows something but can't say it? Emily exhaled and reached for Naomi's hand. This time, the girl didn't flinch, but she didn't relax either. "Come on," Emily said gently. "Let's get some breakfast." Naomi followed her down the hall without a word. The morning passed in quiet routine. Ben and Lily chattered at the table, unaware of the tension simmering just beneath the surface. Daniel sipped his coffee, glancing at his phone. Naomi sat in her usual spot, eating slowly, methodically. Emily forced herself to act normal, to push aside the thoughts clawing at her mind. But as she watched Naomi, she noticed something new, an alertness, a guardedness that hadn't been as obvious before. She wasn't just quiet. She was watching, listening. Later that afternoon, while the kids played outside, Emily sat at the kitchen table, staring at the adoption papers spread out before her. The documents were all in order, notarized and stamped with official seals. Everything appeared legitimate. But now, knowing what she knew, she couldn't stop thinking about the details they had never questioned. Why had the process moved so quickly? Why had there been so little background information on Naomi's parents? The orphanage had simply told them she had been abandoned, that her father had died and her mother had left her. But was that true? Her pulse quickened as she pulled out her phone again. This time she searched for cases involving global kids specifically. More articles appeared. Stories of adoptive parents who had unknowingly taken children whose families had never truly given them up. Emily's stomach churned. She needed answers. That evening, after dinner, she sat down beside Daniel in the living room. The kids were in bed, the house quiet. "I need to talk to you," she said. Daniel glanced at her, noting the seriousness in her voice. He set his phone aside. "What is it?" Emily hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I found something about the agency." He frowned. "What do you mean?" She handed him her phone. "Just read this." Daniel scrolled through the article, his brow furrowing deeper with each paragraph. When he finally looked up, his face was pale. "This?" He exhaled sharply. "This is serious, Emily." "I know," she whispered. "And now I can't stop thinking, what if Naomi's story isn't what we were told?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "Are you saying you think she was taken from her family?" "I don't know," Emily admitted, "but I need to find out." Silence stretched between them. Daniel leaned back, rubbing his temples. If this is true, if her parents didn't actually abandon her, what do we do? Emily's throat tightened. She knew what he was asking. What if Naomi wasn't supposed to be here? For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Daniel sighed. "All right, how do we start?" Emily swallowed hard. "We need to talk to Naomi." The next morning, Emily waited until the house was quiet, until Ben and Lily were at school and Daniel had left for work. She found Naomi in the living room, sitting by the window, staring outside as she often did. Emily sat beside her. "Naomi," she said softly, "can we talk?" Naomi didn't respond, but she didn't walk away either. Emily hesitated, then reached for her phone. She had downloaded a translation app the night before, hoping it would help. Carefully, she typed a sentence and let the robotic voice read it aloud in Naomi's native language. "Can you tell me about your home?" Naomi stiffened. Emily's heart pounded. She waited, watching the girl's expression. For a long time, Naomi said nothing. Then, slowly, she turned to look at Emily. And for the first time since she had arrived, she spoke. Her voice was small, barely above a whisper. The words tumbled out hesitantly, but Emily understood them clearly through the translation. My home was not an orphanage. The air left Emily's lungs. Naomi's gaze darkened, and she gripped her doll tighter. My mother didn't leave me, she said. They took me. Emily's vision blurred. The room seemed to tilt. She had known. Somewhere, deep down, she had known. But hearing Naomi say it made it real. She tried to steady her breathing. Who took you? Naomi hesitated, then whispered a single word. Emily grabbed her phone and typed it in. The translation appeared on the screen. The men. Emily's hands shook as she set the phone down. The agency had lied. Naomi wasn't an orphan, and now Emily had to figure out how to make it right. Emily sat frozen, her mind racing as Naomi's whispered words settled heavily in the air between them. The living room, once a space of warmth and familiarity, now felt suffocating, as if the walls were pressing in. She forced herself to breathe, to stay calm, though her hands trembled against her lap. She had been afraid of this, afraid that the uneasy feeling in her gut wasn't just paranoia, that the nagging doubts she had tried to ignore weren't baseless fears. But now there was no more uncertainty. Naomi had said it herself. She had not been abandoned. She had been taken. Emily turned to look at the little girl beside her. Naomi was clutching her cloth doll so tightly that her knuckles had turned pale, her shoulders hunched as if bracing for a reaction. The guarded look in her eyes sent a pang through Emily's chest. How long had she been carrying this secret? How many times had she wanted to say something but didn't, because she didn't know if she could trust the people who now called themselves her family? Emily swallowed hard and forced herself to speak, keeping her voice steady. "Naomi," she said softly, "do you remember your home?" Naomi hesitated, then gave a tiny nod. Emily's heart pounded. "Can you tell me about it?" The girl's gaze dropped to the floor. She remained silent for a long time, long enough that Emily wondered if she would answer at all. But then, barely above a whisper, she spoke. There was a river. Her fingers curled around the hem of her dress. And trees. And my mother. Emily pressed her lips together, feeling the pressure build behind her ribs. She remembers her mother. Naomi's voice grew even quieter. She made bread in the morning, and we would sit outside. A lump formed in Emily's throat. This was real. This wasn't some vague half-formed memory of an orphanage or a distant relative who'd once cared for her. This was home. A mother. A life that had been stolen. Emily's pulse quickened as she picked up her phone again. "Do you know your mother's name?" she asked. Naomi hesitated, then nodded. "Asha." Emily typed it into her notes. "Asha?" It wasn't much, but it was a start. "Do you know where she is now?" Naomi's fingers tightened around her doll. Her small frame seemed to shrink even more. She shook her head. Emily exhaled and forced herself to smile, though she felt like she was unraveling inside. "Okay," she said gently. "That's okay, sweetheart. You did so well." She placed a hand over Naomi's, giving it a light squeeze. The child didn't pull away this time. Emily knew she needed to tell Daniel immediately. But as she sat there, watching Naomi retreat into herself again, a thought struck her. What if it was too late? What if Asha had spent all these months looking for her daughter, only to be met with silence? What if no one had listened? She couldn't let that happen. That night, after putting the children to bed, Emily sat in the dim light of the living room, her laptop open in front of her. Daniel sat beside her, silent as he read through the articles she had found. His face was tense, his jaw tight. Finally, he leaned back, rubbing his face. "I can't believe this," he muttered. Emily swallowed hard. "I can." Daniel shook his head. "This is insane. We did everything right. We went through a legitimate agency. How could this happen?" Emily exhaled slowly. "Because we didn't ask enough questions." Daniel's expression darkened. "So, what do we do now?" She hesitated before answering. "We find out the truth." She turned the laptop screen toward him. "There are investigative groups that look into cases like this. Journalists, NGOs. I already reached out to one." Daniel's eyes widened. "You did what?" "I sent an email to a journalist who's covered global kids before," Emily admitted. "If there's a chance Naomi has family looking for her, we need to know." Daniel exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair. "And if we find them?" His voice was quiet now, wary. Emily met his gaze. "Then we do what's right." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Daniel nodded. "Okay," he said. "Let's find out." The response from the journalist came faster than Emily expected. A woman named Laura Mason, an investigative reporter who had spent years uncovering fraudulent adoption schemes, replied within hours. Her email was brief but direct. "Your case sounds familiar. I've investigated global kids before. If you're serious about finding Naomi's family, I can connect you with local contacts who may be able to help. But you need to understand what this means. If Naomi was taken from her mother under false pretenses, this isn't just a mistake. It's a crime. Are you ready for what you might find?" Emily stared at the message for a long time before typing her response. "Yes, we need to know the truth." Laura connected them with a Ugandan human rights organization that had been working to reunite children with their families. They specialized in cases where parents had unknowingly lost custody due to predatory adoption agencies. Within days, Emily was speaking with a woman named Miriam, who worked on the ground in Uganda. Miriam was kind but firm. "You must be prepared for all possibilities," she told Emily over the phone. "If Naomi's mother is alive, she may still be searching, but there's also a chance that she has lost hope. Some families stop looking when they believe their children are gone forever." The words sent a chill down Emily's spine. "I understand," she said, "but we have to try." Miriam agreed to begin the search. She would reach out to local communities, check records, speak with people who might know Naomi's origins. It would take time. Emily didn't know how she would survive the waiting. Each day felt like a lifetime. She carried the secret like a weight in her chest, keeping her composure for Naomi's sake while inside she was unraveling. She watched Naomi more closely now, her cautious movements, the way she never fully relaxed, the way she still whispered in her sleep. One night, Emily sat on the edge of Naomi's bed, watching as she breathed softly. She knew deep down that this wasn't about her, that whatever fears she carried, whatever heartbreak she felt at the thought of losing Naomi, it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the truth. And soon they would have it. 3 weeks later, Emily's phone rang. It was Miriam, and the first words she spoke made Emily's breath catch in her throat. "We found her mother." Emily's breath caught in her throat. The words echoed in her mind, ricocheting through her like a shockwave. "We found her mother." She gripped the phone tighter, her knuckles turning white. Her pulse roared in her ears. She had imagined this moment over and over again, had rehearsed how she might react, what she might say, but now that it was real, she felt paralyzed. Miriam's voice on the other end of the line was calm, steady, but Emily could sense the weight of her words. Her name is Asha. She's alive, and she's been looking for Naomi. Emily pressed her fingers to her temple, squeezing her eyes shut. She's been looking for her? Yes, Miriam said, for months. Ever since Naomi disappeared, she's been searching. She went to the authorities, but they did nothing. She asked the orphanage, but they told her Naomi had been adopted and that it was too late. She was devastated. She thought she had lost her forever. Emily swallowed hard. She never abandoned her. No, Miriam said softly. She didn't. The room around Emily seemed to blur, her vision narrowing as the truth sank in. Naomi had a mother, a real, living mother who had never given up on her, a mother who had been deceived, whose daughter had been taken from her under false pretenses. A cold dread settled over her. They had taken Naomi from a woman who had never meant to lose her. Daniel had been watching her from across the room, his brow furrowed in concern. He put down the cup of coffee he had been holding and stepped closer. "What is it?" Emily lowered the phone slightly, covering the speaker with her hand. Her voice came out unsteady. "They found her mother." Daniel froze. The words seemed to hang between them, heavy and undeniable. Miriam's voice pulled Emily back to the present. "Asha wants to speak to you," she said gently. "Would you be willing to have a call with her?" Emily's heart pounded. The idea of speaking to Naomi's real mother terrified her, not because she didn't want to, but because she had no idea what to say. How did you begin a conversation with the woman whose child you had unknowingly taken? How did you explain that you had spent months raising her, believing she had no one? But there was only one answer she could give. "Yes," she whispered. "Please." Miriam promised to arrange the call, and when Emily hung up, she felt as if she had been submerged in cold water. Daniel sat down beside her. He rubbed his hands together, his expression unreadable. "So this is real," he murmured. Emily nodded. "It's real." He exhaled, shaking his head. "And now what?" Emily hesitated, looking down at her hands. "Now, we have to figure out how to fix this." The call was scheduled for the following evening. Emily barely slept the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind raced with possibilities, with fears. She knew nothing about Asha beyond the fact that she had been deceived, that she had been searching. When the time came, Emily sat in front of her laptop, her hands trembling as she clicked on the video call link. The screen loaded, and then there she was, Asha. The woman on the screen had deep brown skin, high cheekbones, and tired eyes that held a quiet sadness. She was wearing a faded blue scarf over her shoulders, her hands clasped tightly together in her lap. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in a soft, hesitant voice, Asha said, "Hello." Emily swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Hello?" Miriam was on the call as well, acting as a translator when needed, but Asha understood some English, enough to communicate. Emily took a shaky breath. I don't know what to say." Asha's lips trembled, but she held herself together. "You have my daughter." Emily felt tears burn behind her eyes. "Yes," she admitted. "I do." Asha inhaled deeply. Her voice wavered, but there was strength beneath it. "They took her from me. They told me she was going to a school, that she would come back." Emily's stomach twisted painfully. "I didn't know." Asha's gaze softened slightly. "I believe you." Those 3 words nearly broke Emily. She had expected anger, expected accusations, expected blame. But instead, there was only sorrow. "I thought she was gone forever," Asha continued. I prayed every day for her to come back. I went to the orphanage. They told me she had a new family, that I had signed the papers, but I never gave her away." Emily nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Asha's eyes glistened. Is she okay?" Emily wiped at her cheek. "She's quiet. She's scared, but she's okay." Asha let out a shaky breath, pressing a hand over her heart. "Does she remember me?" Emily hesitated. "Yes," she said softly. "She whispers your name in her sleep." Asha let out a quiet sob, covering her mouth with her hands. Emily watched as she tried to compose herself, her shoulders shaking. For the first time since the call started, Emily felt the crushing weight of the truth settle fully in her chest. Naomi wasn't theirs. She had never been theirs. She belonged here, with the woman who had never stopped looking for her. Asha wiped her eyes and straightened. "Will you bring her home?" Emily's breath caught. She looked at Daniel, who had been standing silently behind her, watching the exchange with unreadable eyes. He exhaled and gave a small nod. Emily turned back to the screen. Her voice was thick with emotion, but her resolve was clear. "Yes," she whispered, "we will bring her home." Asha's face crumpled, but this time there was something else in her expression. Relief. Emily knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be legal challenges, logistics to work out, the painful reality of telling Naomi the truth, but none of that mattered compared to what was right. She had thought they were saving Naomi, but now she understood. Naomi had a family, and it was time to take her back to them. Emily sat in Naomi's room, the soft hum of the evening air slipping through the open window. The curtains swayed gently, but the world outside felt still, as if holding its breath. Naomi sat on the floor as she often did, cross-legged, her small hands gripping the cloth doll she had carried from Uganda. Her head was tilted slightly downward, but Emily knew she was listening. She always was. Emily took a slow breath, steadying herself. This was the moment she had dreaded, yet she had known it was inevitable. There was no easy way to say what needed to be said. She reached out, placing a gentle hand on Naomi's back, feeling the slight tension beneath her fingertips. "Naomi," she said softly, "I need to talk to you about something very important." Naomi's grip on her doll tightened. She didn't look up, but she didn't pull away either. Emily hesitated. How did you explain something so complex to a child? How did you tell a little girl that the life she had been adjusting to wasn't supposed to be hers? "We found your mama," she said gently. Naomi's shoulders stiffened. Her fingers dug into the fabric of her doll. Her breathing quickened just slightly. Emily felt her throat tighten. "She never stopped looking for you. She loves you very much." For the first time, Naomi raised her head. Her dark eyes met Emily's, searching, questioning. There was no excitement, no relief, only uncertainty, as if she was afraid to believe it. Emily forced herself to keep her voice steady. "Her name is Asha. Do you remember her?" Naomi stared for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. Emily's heart ached. "She wants to see you. She wants you to come home." Naomi didn't speak, didn't move. She simply sat there, processing. Emily knew better than to push. She waited. Finally, Naomi whispered, "But I live here now." Emily's breath hitched. It was the first time Naomi had acknowledged their home as her own. The weight of it pressed against her chest. "I know," she said softly, "and we love you so much. But we also want to do what's best for you." Naomi's fingers traced the worn fabric of her doll. "Will you come?" Emily hesitated. "We'll go with you. We'll be there to make sure you're safe, to help you." Naomi's gaze flickered toward the window, toward the quiet darkness beyond it. What if she doesn't remember me? Emily reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Naomi's forehead. She remembers you, every single day. Silence stretched between them. Naomi swallowed hard and gave a small nod. The decision was made. The following days were filled with preparations, paperwork, legal arrangements, countless calls to officials and human rights organizations. Emily and Daniel worked tirelessly to ensure that Naomi's return would be legal and safe. The logistics were daunting, but the hardest part was the emotional weight of it all. Lily and Ben struggled to understand. Lily cried when Emily told her, clinging to her mother's arm, pleading for Naomi to stay. Ben, though older, was quiet for a long time before asking, "Are you sure this is right?" Emily had knelt before them, her heart breaking. "Yes," she had whispered, "this is right." The night before they left, Naomi crawled into bed with Emily and Daniel, something she had never done before. She didn't say anything, simply curled into Emily's side, her small body warm and fragile. Emily held her close, running her fingers through her hair, feeling the silent weight of the moment settle between them. When the plane took off, Naomi pressed her forehead against the window, staring down at the shrinking city below. She didn't cry, she didn't speak, but Emily could feel her small hand gripping her own, holding on just a little tighter. The journey back to Uganda felt different than the first time. The anticipation, the excitement of bringing Naomi home had been replaced by something heavier, more uncertain. Emily and Daniel exchanged few words during the flight, both lost in their own thoughts. When they landed, the heat wrapped around them, familiar but suffocating. Samuel, the driver who had first picked them up, was waiting for them again, though this time his smile was softer, more knowing. Naomi sat quietly in the back seat, staring out the window as they drove through the winding roads. The city blurred past them, and soon the buildings faded into open land, the countryside stretching wide. As they approached the village, Emily's heart pounded. She could see people gathered near the edge of the road, waiting. And then, in the center of them all, stood a woman. Asha. She was thinner than Emily had expected, her features sharp with worry and exhaustion. But her eyes were alive, scanning the approaching car with desperate anticipation. The vehicle rolled to a stop. Naomi didn't move. Emily turned to her, reaching for her hand. "She's here," she whispered. Naomi's breath came in short, quick gasps. She looked at Emily, then at Daniel, then back at the crowd outside. Emily squeezed her hand. "It's okay," she murmured. "She's your mama." Naomi hesitated, then, slowly, she reached for the car door. The moment she stepped out, the air seemed to still. Asha took a single step forward, then another. "Naomi?" Her voice cracked. Naomi stared. Her fingers curled at her sides, her body trembling. For a moment, she didn't move. And then, suddenly, she ran. Asha caught her in her arms, collapsing to the ground, sobbing into her daughter's hair. Naomi clung to her, her small frame shaking, her hands grasping desperately at her mother's clothing as if afraid she might disappear again. The crowd watched in silence, some wiping away tears. The moment stretched, raw and unfiltered, a reunion that had been stolen from them, now made whole again. Emily felt Daniel's hand on her back. She turned to him, her own eyes damp, and saw the emotion in his face as well. They had done the right thing. It didn't make it any easier. That night, they stayed in the village. Asha invited them into her home, a modest structure with clay walls and a thatched roof. She insisted they stay for food, though she never once let go of Naomi's hand. Emily watched as Naomi sat beside her mother, eating the same way she had in their home, slowly, methodically. But something was different now. She wasn't just eating, she was remembering. Before bed, Asha turned to Emily, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." Emily shook her head. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, "for everything." Asha reached out, taking Emily's hands in her own. "You brought her back. That is enough." Emily nodded, but the ache in her chest didn't lessen. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know how Naomi would adjust, how they would move forward. But as she watched Naomi curl up beside her mother that night, her small body finally at peace, Emily knew one thing for certain. Naomi was home. The morning was quiet, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and distant fires burning from village homes. The light seeped gently through the woven shutters of Asha's small house, casting golden streaks across the clay walls. The night had been long, filled with whispered reassurances, hushed prayers, and the silent weight of years lost between mother and daughter. But now, in the fragile dawn, there was peace. Emily lay awake on the thin sleeping mat Asha had offered them, staring at the ceiling, listening. In the next room, she could hear the slow, steady rhythm of Naomi's breathing, accompanied by the occasional rustling of blankets. She was still here, still with her mother, still safe. Emily had imagined this moment so many times, wondered what it would feel like to finally do the right thing, to correct a mistake she hadn't known she was making. But the feeling wasn't simple. There was no sense of triumph or relief, only a quiet, bittersweet ache. She had given Naomi back, but she had also lost her. She sat up slowly, her body stiff from sleeping on the hard floor. Daniel was already awake, sitting near the doorway, his back resting against the wooden frame. He turned his head slightly as she moved but didn't say anything. He didn't need to. They had been married long enough for Emily to know what he was thinking. They had done what they came here to do. Naomi was home. Now they had to leave. Asha appeared in the doorway a moment later, dressed in a simple wrap dress, her hair covered with a scarf. She smiled softly, though her eyes were heavy with exhaustion. Emily wondered if she had slept at all. "Good morning," Asha said in her quiet voice. Emily nodded. "Good morning." Asha's gaze flickered toward the other room. "She is still sleeping. It has been a long time since she slept so deeply." Emily felt something sharp twist in her chest. She should have been relieved. Instead, she only felt the weight of it, what it meant. Naomi was finally at ease because she was where she belonged. They ate breakfast together, a simple meal of flatbread and tea, sitting on the floor around a low wooden table. Naomi joined them, her small body tucked close to Asha's side, her eyes still cautious but calmer than they had ever been in the Harris home. She didn't look lost anymore. For the first time, she seemed whole. Emily sipped her tea, watching the way Asha smoothed Naomi's hair, the way Naomi leaned into her touch without hesitation. It was a sight, both beautiful and painful. Emily had spent months trying to be that comfort, to be the one Naomi turned to. And yet, in one night, Asha had reclaimed the role that had never truly belonged to anyone else. They sat in comfortable silence for a long time, the morning unfolding around them in slow, deliberate moments. The villagers passed by occasionally, greeting Asha, smiling at Naomi, welcoming her home with quiet nods and murmured blessings. It wasn't until the afternoon that Emily and Daniel knew they could wait no longer. Emily cleared her throat, setting down her cup. We should start heading back soon." Asha's expression remained calm, but her fingers tensed slightly where they rested on Naomi's back. Naomi, however, froze. She lifted her gaze, looking between Emily and Daniel, her face unreadable. For the first time since they had arrived, Emily saw a flicker of something that looked almost like fear. "You are leaving?" Naomi's voice was small. Emily's throat tightened. "Yes, sweetheart." Naomi's hands curled into the fabric of her dress. "When?" Emily swallowed. "Soon." For a long time, Naomi didn't speak. She simply stared, her lips pressing together in that small, familiar way Emily had come to recognize as her way of holding back emotions too big for her to understand. Asha reached for her daughter's hand, squeezing gently. "They have their home," she murmured, "just as you have yours." Naomi's lower lip trembled, but she didn't cry. Emily exhaled slowly, steadying herself. "We love you, Naomi," she said. "That hasn't changed. It never will." Naomi blinked up at her. "Then why do you have to go?" Emily felt her composure crack. She reached for Naomi's hands, cradling them in her own. "Because this is where you belong. This is your home. With your mama." Naomi looked down at their joined hands. Her fingers twitched, as if uncertain whether to pull away or hold on tighter. Daniel cleared his throat, his voice gentle. "We don't want to leave, Naomi, but this was never about us. It was always about finding where you were meant to be." Naomi's shoulders slumped slightly. For a long time, she didn't move. Then, without a word, she let go of Emily's hands and turned into Asha's embrace, burying her face against her mother's side. Emily felt a tear slip down her cheek. This was how it was supposed to be. The goodbyes were quiet, tender. Emily and Daniel packed their small bags, stepping out into the warm afternoon air where Samuel was already waiting with the car. The villagers gathered again, offering nods of respect, silent gratitude. Asha stood beside Naomi, her arm wrapped around her daughter's shoulders. Naomi stared at the ground, her small fingers gripping the hem of Asha's dress. Emily knelt in front of her one last time. "You are so loved," she whispered. "Never forget that." Naomi hesitated, then, finally, she reached forward, wrapping her arms around Emily's neck in a small, tentative hug. Emily held her tightly, her hands trembling against Naomi's back. She closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of her, memorizing this moment, because she knew it was the last time she would hold her like this. When they finally pulled away, Naomi stepped back to Asha's side. Emily stood, nodding at Asha, who met her gaze with a quiet understanding. "Thank you," Asha said. Emily shook her head. "No," she whispered. "Thank you." She turned and climbed into the car beside Daniel. The engine rumbled to life, and as they pulled away, Emily kept her eyes on Naomi for as long as she could, watching as the little girl who would always hold a piece of her heart, stood in the place she was always meant to be. The road stretched ahead of them, winding and endless. The air was heavy, but not with regret. This was the right thing, and even as the village faded behind them, Emily knew Naomi was home. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss future videos. Feel free to share this video with others and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Check out more videos on the channel. There's always something worth watching.